Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have with us John Robert. He is a psychologist and behavioral scientist, expert on influence, and founder and CEO of Influence 51. So we'll learn from him about his five principles of influence, common mistakes leaders make when trying to motivate change, and how to design strategies that move beyond compliance to lasting buy in. Welcome to the show, John Robert.
AJ, it's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show. Dr. John Robert, welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll learn from you about the five principles of influence and much more. But before that, let's learn a bit about your journey, your background, so that the audience knows who they are listening to.
Sure, absolutely. So I am a psychologist and behavioral scientist by training. I did 2 master's degrees, and I just finished up my PhD in psychology at the University of Cambridge. And what I do is pretty simple. I run a consulting practice called Influence 51, where I teach people about people. I teach people about the psychology of influence, how we can change the way people think, behave, and make decisions. And so what I'm here to do today, AJ, a little bit, is just teach you guys and your listeners a little bit about how you might be able to communicate more persuasively or change the way people behave based on principles from psychology and behavioral science.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One thing I want to understand, Dr. John Robert, is people generally say that you can bring a horse to the water but can't force it to drink. And a man convinced against his will is always of the same opinion still. So all these things that we have come up. In that backdrop, what is it that you are trying to say with what you are saying and with what you are doing?
Yeah, I think that's excellent, right? That quote right there is actually it was popularized by Dale Carnegie, but I believe it was
Right.
Samuel Butler who was the original quotation. A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. It's one of the best pieces of wisdom you can possibly give someone when it comes to differentiating between mere compliance and genuine persuasion. And it really cuts to the heart of what drives genuine persuasion, which is that you cannot force someone to change their mind. What you can do is create a space where someone is willing to have a conversation, where they're willing to have a conversation that is potentially vulnerable, where they're potentially going to question and reflect upon their own points of view, and where you might have the opportunity to shift their perspective. But ultimately, AJ, what we need to understand is that you are not the most persuasive person in that conversation. The other person is the most persuasive, right? They can change their own mind. You are simply planting the seeds that they then have to go and water.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what backdrop you generally talk about? Is it for salespeople? Is it for political people? Is it for a person on the street? Is it for mobsters? Is it for someone who is trying to manipulate someone else? Is it in relationships? Who is the person that you are trying to give this knowledge to?
It's a very good question. I hope that mobsters and manipulators are not using my content too much, but it is interesting because any piece of knowledge is a hammer, right? It is both a tool and a weapon depending on who is holding it. And so I hope the individuals who end up using my content are using it for good. But I actually started my consulting practice specifically with the goal of working across industries. I wanted to bring the insights on how we shape attitudes, shift decisions, and change behavior to corporate leaders. I wanted to bring them to lawyers and litigators. I wanted to bring them to wealth advisors. I wanted to bring them to charities and nonprofits, political campaigns. And so that is what I do. I work across industries, across kind of a wide variety of audiences. But at the heart of what I do, it's very, very simple, right? I teach people about people, how they think, how they make decisions, how they behave, and how we can use insights from these fields to potentially change the way they do those things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So why is it that some people have been very successful in history in doing what they wanted to, in persuading people, and then it came out to be very disastrous. The result was for the whole of humanity. Even today, if you see a lot of political level also, even in terms of corporates also, people talking about climate change, all those people who are bringing about such to that situation, they don't get to be persuaded. They persuade or dilute that whole concept about responsibility and tell everyone else, you plant trees, I will keep on doing what I want to. You go for peace, you do the things, but I will continue to wage wars against nation. What is the psychology? Where have they learned all this from? I'm sure you did not teach them. They learned it long back, and even now they are learning from different places. I want to understand why. How are they able to do it? How are even corporate leaders able to do such things?
It's really interesting, right? Because I mean, first of all, it's incredibly frustrating. And if you look throughout history, there are individuals who, they did not formally study psychology and behavioral science. They did not formally study human nature, and yet they seem to have a really good intuitive grasp of what makes people tick, what moves people. And I think one of the things that we have to kind of differentiate, AJ, which is really, really important, is persuasion from mobilization, right? When you're working with political campaigns, let's say, the first thing you do is you kind of separate the two groups that you're going to be working with. The first group is the smaller of the two, right? Those are the people that are genuinely undecided. They're on the fence. These are the people that we can call the persuadables, right? And so they represent a much, much smaller portion of the population. The other group, which is much larger for both, political parties or however many political parties are in your political system, these are the individuals that already agree with what you say. All you need to do with these people is mobilize them, right? Is to get them to go out and vote. One of the challenges we have is that a lot of political systems around the world have become so polarized that all you're doing now is you're continuing to rile up and mobilize individual bases, right? The people who already agree with you. And the challenge becomes is that when these individuals are constantly fed what they want to hear, what they want to believe, and are never really challenged, it starts to become much more of a moralized thing, right? That we are always right and the other side is always wrong. Once issues become moralized, once it doesn't become about policy preferences or kind of gradients of good and bad, and it becomes black and white, then people become much easier to manipulate, right? When you're dealing with the other side that is evil, the other side that are bad people, and you have leaders that are quote unquote showing you the right way, showing you what's good, people are much easily moved by that. And so there's a lot of danger with any type of leader that feels that they have a base that sees them as a deity, that sees them as they can do no wrong. And so part of the challenge is, how do we have complicated, challenging conversations, right, that are able to integrate both perspectives without it becoming so contentious? And that's something that a lot of people are still working on. It's not an easy problem to solve.
Absolutely, JonRobert. So let me understand for the audience, what is influence in today's time? Earlier, it was more about personality, the way you speak. Today, it's all about AI and so many other things. So how do we know what influence is in today's time?
Yeah, it's a great question. Influence is a lot of things. And as a matter of fact, influence is such a complicated, multifaceted topic. That's actually what drove me to create what I call the 5 principles of influence, right? Because I had clients coming to me saying, teach me about influence. And I would say, well, listen, for me to teach you about influence, we would need years. Okay, there's so much information out there. But what I can do is I can synthesize the most important things I know into 5 basic principles. And that's what I've done, right? And so for me, what influence really is influence is understanding how people think and make decisions, understanding where their attitudes tend to come from, whether that be their social groups, their political groups, their communities, or their upbringing, understanding how different types of people think differently. And then, of course, understanding how do I communicate in a way where I stand a chance of changing someone's perspective, right? Of getting them to consider something from a different point of view. For me, these are kind of the core components of influence. And if you'd like, I'm happy to quickly go through the 5 principles as I see them, and maybe your listeners might find some value in them.
Absolutely. That's the core topic for the day, the 5 principles of influence. So help us understand so that a lot of people, the audience, can understand these 5 principles.
Great. So we'll run through these really quickly, and then AJ, if you want to go in further depth on any of them, you let me know. Principle number 1 is what I believe to be the greatest misconception about how people think, right? Principle number 1 is that the human brain is not a computer. And what I mean by that is a lot of people operate under this assumption that the human brain works like a computer does, right? It is kind of designed to find accurate answers, right? To search for the truth. In reality, the human brain is better thought of, and human beings in general are better thought of not as rational creatures, but as rationalizing creatures. And there's a really important distinction there. If humans were rational creatures, right, our brains would work like scientists do. They would look for every piece of evidence. They would weigh each piece of evidence objectively and impartially, and would try to come to the best, most accurate answer with the data available. In reality, our brains work much more like a trial lawyer does, where it has particular views, particular beliefs, particular worldviews that it wants to defend, and it selectively chooses pieces of evidence that enable it to defend those views. And in this way, it rationalizes rather than being purely rational. This is the first thing to understand about influence, is that the human brain is not a computer. We have these very predictable ways that our brains deviate from kind of pure logic or pure rationality. And the people that understand the ways they deviate are better able to predict and adapt to them. Principle number 2 is that our social nature matters. And what this means is that we don't make decisions in isolation, right? A lot of times when we're making our decisions, we want to understand what other people are doing. We look to the group, whether that be our social group or our political group. What others around us are doing impacts how we think, how we decide, and ultimately what we do. And so understanding things like social norm adherence, our propensity to kind of look into the group and say, what are most people like me doing, is a really important facet of influence. That's principle 2. Principle 3 is that our political sensibilities matter. Now, when I give principle 3, a lot of people think to themselves, does our political sensibilities really impact us that broadly? And the answer is yes. Although politics is most prominent in the voting booth or during election seasons, liberals and conservatives, if we were to kind of place these types of individuals on the political spectrum, are different types of people. I'll give you a really quick example. Back in 2011, they put people in an fMRI machine and they looked at different regions of the brain. And they could tell with 72% accuracy who was liberal and who was conservative just by looking at 2 brain regions, the amygdala and the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. This isn't to say that liberals and conservatives can't agree on things. There's actually a lot of opportunities for agreement. But it's important to understand that these types of people think differently, see the world differently, think about human nature differently, and ultimately are persuaded by different types of arguments and facts. Principle number 4 is all about approach. Our approach matters. And this kind of goes back to principle 1. If we were perfectly rational creatures, if our brains worked like a computer did, it wouldn't matter how you approach someone, right? If your argument was good, they should be persuaded. But that's not how humans work. And the example I always give, AJ, is what's the first thing you want to do when you see a do not touch the art sign? we all suddenly want to touch the art, right? And it's this weird phenomenon that psychologists have studied called psychological reactance. Basically, when we feel like our autonomy is being constrained, that we're being forced to do something, we push back, right? It's this natural human inclination. And it's the same thing for persuasion. When someone feels like you're trying to force them to think a certain way, like you're trying to pressure them to take a certain attitude or point of view, people naturally push back. And because of this, persuasion is less about the content of your arguments, and it's more about creating a space through your approach where someone feels comfortable letting their guard down and having a genuine conversation as opposed to just defending their point of view. Principle number 5, the 5th principle, is that structure and presentation matter. And what I mean by that is it's not just what you say, it's also how you say it. You can say the exact same thing, but say it in slightly different ways and elicit very different reactions from people. The classic example I give is, imagine that you were in the mood for some frozen yogurt, right? And you go to your local grocery store and you see option A and it says frozen yogurt, 80% fat-free. And you think, okay, that sounds pretty good, but let me go see what my other options are. So you go a little further down the aisle, you see option 2, it says frozen yogurt contains 20% fat. Which one sounds better? Now, you and I are very smart people. Your listeners are very smart people. You quickly realize that these are the same exact yogurts. 80% fat-free is 20% fat and vice versa. But in spite of them being statistically identical, they still elicit different immediate reactions from people. And because of that, the way we structure our arguments, the words we choose, the metaphors we use, impact how people receive our arguments and how they think about the topics we're speaking to them about. Those are the 5 principles.
Wonderful, wonderful, JonRobert. So let me understand then, what do humans want? How is it that they decide? Because you talked about the human brain, and then you talked about the political sensibilities, and we also talked about the other points. At one point in time, I may want a very good person on, as a politician.
Yeah.
But while going to vote, I may think about something else. In the same way, I may want, I can choose a corrupt person, but at the same time, I would want a company to do good as a customer.
Yeah.
And I would feel offended if, for a say, $5 thing is not working properly, but a $500 million bridge is not working. We are not bothered about that. What sort of persons then are we? How should we understand who we are, and how should others understand who this person is? How should we approach them? Because we are, 2 different sides of our own selves.
Yeah.
How do you decode them?
It's a very tough question. It's a question that, I can give a few ideas about, but I can't say that I know exactly the answer to this, because if any psychologist who's worth his or her salt is speaking honestly, we don't know. There is no way to perfectly answer this, because what you're getting at, AJ, which is really, really important, is that human beings are incredibly complex, right? When I work with clients, if you're a business owner and you're listening to this, or you're in the learning and development space, whatever it may be, and you're thinking about bringing in someone like me, a psychologist or behavioral scientist, if they tell you, I know exactly what you should do to make people think this or make people do this, they're lying to you. They're selling you a lie, right? What we can do, what people like myself can do, is we give you a few percentage points of advantage, right? We kind of tip the scales just a little bit in your favor, because that's all we can do when it comes to human nature, because you're talking about something really, really critical, right? We are all multitudes. At the same time, I am, or let's take someone, some hypothetical individual. They are a father, they are a husband, they are a son, they are a community member, they're a member of a political group, they're a member of a cricket team, right? They're all these different things rolled into one. We have these multitude of identities. And it's really interesting because we can have different opinions based upon the identity that is most salient at that time, right? You talk about something like a political policy that someone is trying to put into law. Well, me as an individual might say, hey, I think that's a good policy, right? Me as a father might say, I think that policy is dangerous because I'm thinking through the perspective of my son or daughter, right? Me as a political member might say, I like this policy because most of the other party members that I associate with, that I have a good relationship with, tend to like this. And so the challenge that we deal with is that nobody is one thing. Right? Humans are kind of these, what we can call complex systems. And so one of the most important things to do when you're trying to, for instance, build a campaign or you're trying to create some sort of behavior change strategy is doing something that we like to call agenda setting. And what agenda setting is kind of planting the seed of, as you think about this policy or this procedure or this new law or this new whatever, here is the most important lens that you should be thinking about it through, right? And you want to kind of try to influence how someone, the identity that someone assumes when they're thinking about this, right? Am I thinking about this as a father, as a husband, as a son, as a community member? Agenda setting is one of the most kind of underappreciated parts of trying to build an effective influence strategy. But it's the type of thing that tries to address exactly what you're getting at, right? How do we slightly tip the scale between how AJ is going to vote, whether he thinks about himself as this or this or this or this when he gets into the voting booth?
Right. So when do you come into the picture, Dr. John Robert? Who is your ideal client? Why do they generally call you? What do they generally call you for?
So, I work with a variety of clients, as I mentioned. You can find a lot of them on the website, but I do sessions for McDonald's, Visa, Texas Instruments, Boys and Girls Clubs, large law firms like DLA Piper and Fox Rothschild. They all call me for basically, broadly, the same thing, right? They want their people to understand people better. But context here is really, really important, right? How they want to apply these things makes a big difference. For instance, my corporate clients might want to understand how they use psychology and behavioral science and the 5 principles of influence to motivate people more effectively, right? My political clients might want to know how they use those things to frame their messages to make sure they persuade voters. My legal clients might want to understand how they use these things to persuade juries that they're talking to, right? How do I build effective stories that change the minds of juries? My wealth advisors, my financial clients want to understand, how do I make sure that my clients, my financial clients, stick to the plan, even when times get emotional, even when the market starts having a lot of volatility? How do I put kind of guardrails, behavioral guardrails in place that maximize the chances that my clients are going to stick to the plan we've made for them? Nonprofit clients want to understand the psychology of fundraising. The point is that I do a lot of different things with a lot of different groups, but it all comes back to the same exact foundation. How do people think, decide, and behave? And how can we create a better understanding of that in your people so that they can do their jobs better, they can build better strategies and become more effective leaders?
Right. So what are the most powerful, or what is the most powerful tool to influence people in today's time? Is it the same as advertising? Is it the same as public relations, publicity, or is it something much more about self-authenticity?
It's an excellent question, and I think I really like the way you frame this too, right? Because you talk about something like advertising. Advertising and marketing in general has been based on the kind of core of their influence, so to speak, has been the same thing for a very long time. And it's a phenomenon known as the mere exposure effect, which is basically human beings tend to feel more comfortable and obviously more familiar with things that they see over and over and over again, right? And so the cornerstone of modern marketing for the past several decades has really been, how do we make our product, our brand ubiquitous? Because if I see Coca-Cola more than I see the logo for Pepsi, and I'm presented with an opportunity to choose for both, and I don't have much of a preference, I tend to go with what feels most comfortable at a subconscious level, and that's the one that I see and have greater familiar with. Now, it's different when it comes to interpersonal influence, right? If I was trying to change your mind on something, mere exposure effect isn't our best tool. I like to believe, especially when it comes to the very thorny socio-political ideas, right? The things that people are really dug in deep on. I think the most powerful tool that we have is what's known as self-generated persuasion. And what this means, AJ, is that I'll give you a quick example, right? A few years ago, a team of behavioral scientists were trying to get people to display greater helping behavior. And they had two groups. They had these kind of participants randomly allocated into these two groups. For the first group, they gave them the two strongest arguments they could for why helping others is good, right? They sat them down and they gave them a little mini lecture basically on why helping others is good with very strong arguments. For the second group, instead of telling them why helping others is good, they asked them, come up with two reasons on your own why helping others is a good thing to do. And what they found was that the second group showed a 90% increase in helping behavior over the first group, okay? And that's because of this phenomenon known as self-generated persuasion. It's captured really well by the philosopher Blaise Pascal a few hundred years ago, where he said, people are generally better persuaded that things that they believe have come from their own mind than the same reasons that have been given to them by someone else. And so if you really want to change someone's mind, you kind of have to put your own ego aside, right? It doesn't have to be you giving them a great argument and shifting the way they think about the world. Sometimes it's as simple as creating a space where they feel comfortable, where they kind of let their guard down, and asking them a really pointed question. Hey, I know you believe in this, but have you ever thought about this? No judgment at all, but have you ever thought about this? How it might impact these people or how it might do this? And just give it for them to think about, right? Don't try to push them. Don't try to force them, but just kind of plant that seed and give them an opportunity to reflect, to think about their own thinking. And that ultimately is often the best chance we have of actually changing someone's mind, is giving them a chance to change their own mind, as opposed to you trying to force your way into changing their mind.
Absolutely, absolutely. One last question I have for you, Dr. JonRobert, is that, a lot of times when you are, I see a lot of videos nowadays of leaders from the past, not so very long ago, 10 years back, they became the president. I see some of the speeches, very, very good speeches. And then you find that all were only speeches. Wonderful speeches got you elected, but nothing happened. The same with corporate leaders. Many a times, earlier on, you had the comfort of speaking something, promising something, and thinking that the world will forget. Let me get onto the numbers that I want to. Let me get onto the chair that I want to. But today it's a digital world. The people, even if they forget, the digital world does not forget. And at the same time, nowadays, leaders are not only worried about the results presently, but also are worried about their legacy. How do you then do things and communicate use your influence for today, as well as make sure that your legacy also stays the way you want to? What is the best way to do that? So that today it may sound very good, but tomorrow you may sound like a crooked, wicked fellow who are speaking all lies all throughout. How do you manage these both things, either as a political person, either as a corporate leader?
It's a very tough thing to manage. And I'll say, AJ, let's talk politics first, right? You hit on something that is completely accurate, which is we have, since basically the dawn of time, right? We've had politicians that promise the world, they promise they're going to do this and this and this and this. And then they get into office and they rarely deliver what they promise. And we wonder, why do we keep electing people who do this? And it's easy to point the finger at certain politicians and say, well, they're liars. And guess what? That's true. There are many politicians who are liars. But it's also a problem with the system. And the problem with the system is that for people that do not make great promises, right, that do not go out there and promise these big, grandiose things to the world, they often don't get anyone who is willing to support them, right? And so we have this kind of perverse system where people are only going to lend their support to the people that are making the best promises, even though we know from past experience they're probably not going to be able to deliver on those promises. And so that is a systemic issue that we really need to work on kind of fixing. And there's no easy fix for that. But beyond that, you talked about this idea of legacy. And I think this is such an important motivator, right? A lot of times, business leaders, for instance, when you start talking to them about things like immediate goals, immediate results, it often primes them to start thinking about, how do I do things that are going to increase profit and increase revenue right now, right? It kind of primes this short-term, very immediate gratification type thinking. But there's really interesting research out there about talking about things like legacy, right? About asking someone, what do you want to be remembered for? And it's a really interesting tactic that you can use when you want to encourage someone to kind of get out of that short-term profit-only thinking, is to ask them, how do you want to be remembered? Because what that ends up doing is that ends up putting a longer-term horizon on how we go about achieving results, what we're trying to achieve in those results. And so having this prime, getting people, or constantly reminding them about how this might impact your legacy. We are inherently social creatures. We care about our legacy. And so being reminded, knowing that there's a record of this, knowing that people are going to look back and judge you for what you've done today, has been shown to change the decisions people make, change the behavior they exert, and ultimately might be able to change the results we see when it comes to business leaders, political leaders, and the like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is so much to learn about all this from you, Dr. JonRobert, and I'm sure a lot of business people, a lot of political people, and a lot of other people would want to connect with you and learn more about all this, especially the 5 principles of influence and much more. What's the best way for them to do so?
Best way is going to be my website, Influence51. That's influence51.com. You can go there. You can find not only a lot of information on myself and my services, but also some free resources on there. You can take an influence assessment to understand how you tend to try to influence people. There's some free leadership guides you can download, things like that. And also some free videos for you to check out. But if you want to, if you're able to spell my name, you can look me up on LinkedIn too. I have a love-hate relationship with LinkedIn, but I'm trying to be better at it. I'm trying to be on there, and you're always welcome to send me a message, reach out, say hi. Always happy to have a conversation with anyone who's interested.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.